Three, two, one, and we're recording. Hey guys, welcome back to the LOFT Project. As always, I'm your host, James Robertson, and this is episode 33, I believe. And as always, don't forget, if you like the content, why not press the subscribe button and never miss another episode. Right, back to tonight's episode. I'm super excited to speak out tonight's guest. He really needs no introduction, but you will know him from his bodies of work. Filmmaker, book author, films he's made. There's a funny thing happened on the way to the moon. Astronauts Gone Wild, and his latest book, Moon Man. So he had to talk about all of that. Please welcome to the show, Mr. Bart Sibrel. How are you doing?
Hey, Jane. I'm doing good. How about yourself?
Perfect. Like I said to you off camera, thank you so much for sparing some time with us for tonight. We realize you're a very, very busy guy, and it's an absolute privilege to speak to you.
Oh, likewise.
Perfect. So I guess apologies if I ask questions that you've been asked 1,000 times, but you know it's for those who are not kind of aware of your kind of body of work and the things that you've done, I'll be asking questions from that kind of perspective. So, what was the first thing that actually made you question the Apollo missions? Let's go right back to the beginning. What was the first thing?
Well, like everybody else, I grew up believing they were real. My father was in the Air Force, and about every 2 or 3 years, I moved to another Air Force base, and there were air shows all the time, and I hung around the latest and greatest in aviation since I was born. And my father was an officer, and when the alleged moon mission happened in July of 1969, I was actually 4 years old, asleep in bed, past my bedtime. And he got a VIP package of color prints from Apollo 11, about 20 pictures. And he gave them to me as a gift, and I put them up on my bedroom wall. So from about the age of 4 to 14, for 10 years, I saw them every day of the year, 10 years in a row, or some 3,650 times, believing the moon missions were real. And then when I was 14 years old, I was watching a news program that had as their guest William Casing, who worked for Rocketdyne on site at the Apollo program for 6 years. He actually was an English major. And so what he would do is edit the memos going from like the Pentagon and von Braun, kind of polish up their grammar to make them look a little bit more educated than they really were. And in order to be privy to those correspondence at such a high level, he had to have very high security clearance himself. And he told me he read a memo from von Braun warning the Pentagon in the early 60s, after Kennedy misspoke and said they could go to the moon by the end of the decade, that the odds of them doing it successfully without killing the crew were probably only 1 in 10,000 chance, that it was, virtually impossible, hazardous. And so, like a good poker player who had crap, they bluffed and they pretended they could do, you could say, to temporarily fool the Soviets into thinking we had as good a rocket technology as they did. But also, the Vietnam War was going on, and Richard Nixon, who was president at the time, said that the greatest threat to America wasn't Russia or China. It was American citizens who protested the federal government. Sounds familiar.
Sounds
familiar. Like they're
familiar.
playing that tune again, aren't they?
Yeah.
And so, whoever killed Kennedy, the guy's still dead. And whoever did 9/11, 3,000 people are still dead. This fraud, however, conspiracy, if you want to call it, which just means a planned lie, is positive. It's giving candy to children. I mean, they're depressed about the Vietnam War and wondering why we went into such a thing. And now they have something to cheer about. And they actually, I'll later, mention the code name that I found out for the real Apollo project by an eyewitness who saw them faking it. It basically, one of the benefits of faking it was that they could guarantee its success. It wasn't like, well, will they make it? Will they die on live TV?
Yeah.
If you faked it, you have a 100% guarantee they will walk on the moon and come back safely, at least in appearance.
Yeah.
And so when I saw him on TV as a 14-year-old, I, had an open mind, and which is really important for learning truth. And I went back and looked at those pictures on my wall. Now, the original prints that I got in the late 60s, they've been touched up quite a bit. The soil of the moon is actually a caramel brown color, and the Chinese probes show this. And so the projected backgrounds were kind of a grayish blue. So you could see pretty much a straight line going across left to right horizontally, where the real soil ended and where the fake backgrounds began. NASA since put filters on these things, and so that the soil is a grayish blue color to match the grayish blue projected backgrounds. But so that kind of planted a seed in my mind. Isn't this interesting? I can kind of realize my eyes were wide shut. I was looking at these things 3,650 times and not looking at them with a critical point of view, just assuming that the government told the truth about it. Go forward another 10 years, that would make me 24 at this point in the timeline. And I had become a filmmaker. And mind you, a filmmaker's job is to make fake scenes look real.
Yeah.
I remember once showing a colleague who was more experienced than I was a film that I had just made that I think won Best Editing Award. And he says, Bart, I love the way you used the sunset so beautifully in the background outside of the window. And I said, well, that was really a light. I fooled another filmmaker.
Yeah.
And so with that, kind of job description, making fake scenes look real, I can even look more critically than most at the pictures and video. And so, as fate would have it, one day I'm editing something, I forgot what it was, for the man who actually produced the show I'd seen 10 years earlier as a 14-year-old about the fake moon landings. And I'm like, who was that guy who worked for Rocketdyne who said we didn't go to the moon? And he said, oh, I don't remember. Call the San Francisco office. So I did. And they told me, had I called just a day or two later, I wouldn't be able to find out who it was, because every 10 years they deleted, physical files and videotapes to make room for more current projects. So I called up Bill Casing, and just in case they did fake it, I thought, well, if they did fake it, maybe he's not even Bill Casing. Maybe they killed him, and this is a proxy so that people who have information about it will go to him and they'll know what's going on. But after talking to him for a few minutes, I could tell he was the genuine article. And as a filmmaker, he naturally suggested that I do a film about it. Well, I didn't immediately agree or disagree with the idea. I took about 6 months off from work, and I started looking at the photographs even more critically. You can really prove the moon landings are fake with one picture. And just go to Sibrel.com, Sibrel.com, and click on the top left button, which is Moonman Video Links. My book is interactive with 16 links. Well, the first one is a 3-minute video where I show a picture of shadows intersecting at 90 degrees from objects 5 feet apart from one another. Now, all you have to do, and I do a side-by-side comparison in sunlight of objects 5 feet apart, the shadows are always parallel and never intersect. So when shadows are intersecting at 90 degrees from objects 5 feet apart that they claim are in sunlight, which are always parallel, well, that's a lie. That means that these pictures were taken with electrical light. So scientifically, you can prove the moon landing fraud in one picture story, because you cannot have intersecting shadows in sunlight from objects 5 feet apart, which means it's electrical light, which means they're not on the moon. And seeing how that picture was from the alleged last mission to the moon, it means they never got their act together and never, went. And of course, once people accepted in their minds that it was real, it's actually easier to fake them with more botched, photographic errors.
Yeah.
So I actually, I started looking at the pictures and saying, that doesn't look right. And then I found out 2 of the 3 astronauts never gave interviews for some strange reason. You would think they'd want to talk about the greatest event in human history, but they really didn't want to. And then I found out that the Soviets were super more advanced than we were. After all, they put the first satellite in orbit, the first man in orbit, the first space crew of 3, the first of 2 spacecraft simultaneously, the first woman, the first spacewalk, the first animal. For every hour we spend in space, they spend 5 hours, 5 times the experience, and every single space milestone they did first. Much more advanced, and then suddenly we outdid them 1,000-fold overnight, and it doesn't make sense. when NASA has never kept a schedule a single time, except the most complicated one of all time. They did the very first attempt ahead of schedule. They said in 2014 they were going to have people orbiting the moon in 2018. Well,
yeah.
double that time to this year, and they have mannequins orbiting, which doesn't make sense. Somehow they could walk on the moon with 1 millionth the computer power cell phone, and for some reason they can only send mannequins out into outer space today.
Sorry to talk over you. I actually saw somebody put a video together recently, and it was just little clips of quite a few different presidents over the years saying the same things. We're going to be going back to the moon in 10 years time, in 15 years time, and they all make the same promises, and yet they never do it. And like believe what you're alluding to.
Yeah, if you don't mind, James, please pop that link in an email to me just so I can have it for my archives. But I've basically approximately every 5 years they say they were returning to the moon in about 10 years, and they've never done it. Most recently I did a video on my YouTube channel, which you just go to Sibrel.com and scroll down to the YouTube link at the bottom, where in 2004 Bush Jr. said they're going to be on the moon in 2020. Now that's 16 years into the future, and they never did it. Yet somehow, 3 decades earlier, when they had never been in space at all, they went from never putting a man in space to walking on the moon in half the time, with 1 millionth the computing power of the time of George Bush Jr.'s age, right? How can that be? How can they go to the moon in half the time with 3 decades older technology when they make a goal to go to the moon in twice the time with 3 decades newer technology, and they can't meet the goal?
Yeah,
it totally contradicts it. So in a way, you have the shadows intersecting, which proves it. And today, with NASA's best technology, they can only send astronauts 1,000th the distance to the moon. So that means they had 1,000 times greater space traveling technology in 1969 than they do today, which means technology was better in the past than in the future, which is a scientific and historic impossibility.
Technology
that proves the fraud.
Yeah,
right?
Technology doesn't go backwards, right? You would have thought
it's impossible.
You look at
unless there's an asteroid strike, and I don't think one happened since 1969.
You just look at these supercomputers that we all have in our own pockets now, right? The capabilities of these things. You would think we would have hotels and moon bases and all kinds of things, Go on.
Oh, I'm just saying it's the only time in recorded history that a technological milestone wasn't surpassed 10 years later, much less 50 years later.
Yeah.
For example, they blew the first atomic bomb in 1945, and 10 years later, atomic bombs were 1,000 times more powerful. So that's like saying Lindbergh flew across the Atlantic in 1927. 50 years later, no airplane can fly across the Atlantic when they had airplanes the size of houses flying across the Atlantic, and millions of them. So that just really doesn't make any sense, that they could have greater technology in the past. Whoever faked the moon landing fraud obviously was thinking short term and saying, well, whoever's the president, 20, 30, 50 years from now, they'll have to deal with that. They keep sweeping it under the rug, which is a terrible thing to do, because Orwell said, whoever controls the past controls the future. So that means in the past, these people faked the moon landing, and to this day, the same entities are claiming it's real. So those corrupt people who control the past are controlling our destiny and our lives today. And that's a dangerous thing, because one of my chapters in my book, Moon Man, the true story of a filmmaker on the CIA hit list, it's at Sibrel.com in audio, print, or Kindle, is testimony from dead astronauts' relatives who say that their Apollo astronaut father and husband was murdered by the CIA. So it's one thing to counterfeit something and never kill anybody. But if you counterfeit something and you murder your own brethren citizens to cover it up, this has not been brought to light, this has not gone to trial, that means the same institution is in power today, murdering people. I mean, it's in writing during Kennedy's administration that the Pentagon suggested blowing up Americans at random and blaming it on Cuba.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, and they put that in writing and didn't go to jail. Isn't that legally attempted murder?
Yeah, and
right?
that's facts. That's facts.
Murder,
that's not conspiracy theory. That's facts. That is a fact that happened.
And so, everything gets better over time, including evil and deception. And so just because every TV station in the world said men were on the moon when in fact they were in New Mexico, if every TV station in the world says there's a boogie virus going around the world, does it mean it's true just because the TV says so? Right?
Yeah.
I mean, Robert McNamara said on his deathbed that the Gulf of Tonkin incident, which was the beginning of the Vietnam War, which led to the death of 1 million people, that the CIA just made that up as an excuse to start the war. So I think if they're willing to kill 1 million people without cause, they're willing to fake an image on a television set,
100%.
And yeah, I mean, the number one reason I hear why the moon missions must be real is the government would never lie about such an important thing. I mean, they're murdering their own people. They're murdering their own people. So I think, faking a TV image is no big deal to them.
I mean, they faked
So
you mentioned Gulf of Tonkin. Same with the Iraq War. We went to war with Iraq based on weapons of mass destruction, which our governments both know never existed in the first place. And I think is there anywhere up to 1 million Iraqi civilians have died in that conflict up to this modern day, and we know that they lied about that. We know about the Gulf of Tonkin. Why do you think people don't want to believe that their government are capable of lying and hurting their own people?
Well, most people actually do know that. That's really not the problem, because in a survey, 75% of Americans believe Oswald did not kill Kennedy. Mm-hmm. And believe it or not, 50% of Americans respect the 3,000 architects and engineers who risked losing their livelihood and lifelong reputations by saying in writing, it's mechanically impossible for a pinhole airplane to bring down a skyscraper. All you got to do is look at the Oklahoma City bombing. Half the building was blown away and it can't collapse because it's a grid. Yeah. And so half of Americans think that airplanes did not bring it down, that explosives did. And the only way you could put that many explosives on U.S. territory is if you're a U.S. citizen. That's why our founding fathers warned us of two kinds of enemies, foreign and domestic, right?
Yeah.
Our leading generals were traitors back then. Benedict Arnold was a general in the American Army. So the people who did 9/11 are Americans. The people who killed Kennedy are Americans. The people who faked the moon landing are Americans. You want to talk about election interference? Well, the federal government murdered Kennedy. That's not my opinion. That's the opinion of the dead man's relatives, and they have access to more data than anybody.
Yeah.
So the federal government, the corrupt federal government, interfered with their own elections because they didn't like the person who was elected, because he was going to clean house and get rid of the people who interfered with the election, you see?
Yeah.
And they had articles during Kennedy's administration what a Russian sympathizer, Kennedy was, simply because he was trying to stop nuclear war, and kill half the world.
Yeah. It's mad. So
go ahead.
So going back to a funny thing happened on the way to the moon. So you've taken time out to do your research. You say about 6 months you took out.
And then basically I turned down the project.
Yeah.
Because I figured, there's at least, with the shadows intersecting and the weird behavior, and then the administrator of NASA resigns without explanation days before the first Apollo mission. And I'm thinking, well, what is that all about? You would think you'd want to be there, be the leader, and he didn't want to have anything to do with it. And then I'm thinking, something doesn't smell right about this. And I realized I like puzzles, mazes. I used to draw mazes in the 4th grade that adults had difficulty doing. I like thought puzzles. And I kind of have, you could say, a relentless, never give up personality. And so those two things combined, I said to myself, if anyone could get to the bottom of this, it might be me. However, if I start looking into this and they really did not go to the moon, it could be dangerous. So I turned it down. I said, I want to have a wife and family someday. I'm a liar. Everybody's a liar. I'm not going to risk my life for what Nixon did 30, 40, 50 years ago. So I said, no, thank you. And then about another 5 years go by, I have this another client who's this Christian musician, and they say they'll get a script of mine to a Hollywood producer if I do them a favor. And I'm like, well, what favor is that? They said, read the Bible. So they got me what's called the 1 year Bible, which is the Bible divided into 365 calendar reads, like February 1st and March 2nd and so forth. And I remember starting reading it June 3rd, 1989, the day the guy stood in front of the tanks in China. And over the next 5 years, I'd read the Bible 5 times from cover to cover. Now, I wasn't a Christian by any means. However, it did develop in me an understanding that there's a spiritual battle going on in individual lives, to smoke, not smoke, to be faithful to your spouse or not, to steal or not. And it's going on a global scale too. The Bible says that Lucifer actually is king of the earth for the moment, because he said to Jesus, if you bow down and worship Lucifer, he'll give you the kingdoms of the world because they belong to him, and he can give them to anyone he wants. So he's going to give them to evil people. And that's why the evil people are running the world. And they appoint evil people over the Justice Department, the FBI, and all that, because that's why all these things are never investigated, because the departments that should be investigating the fraud are corrupt themselves.
Yeah.
So I realized, I'm going to die anyway. And if they faked the moon landing, that's actually more profound historically than if they had actually gone. Do you see that?
Yeah.
Either they went, planted a flag, and whoop-de-doo, or they embezzled $200 billion, murdered people to keep it a secret, and are too juvenile to admit that they made this mistake 50 years ago. In humanity's history, that's more profound of an event, the faking of the moon landing, than if they had actually gone. And the fact that people are just psychologically brainwashed into not accepting facts when they're presented with them. I talked to a professor of an aerospace university, and you can read this in my book at Sibrel.com. And I showed him all this proof, including classified footage that we uncovered of them faking being halfway to the moon right in front of your eyes, with a third track of audio of the CIA telling him how to do it. The third proof they didn't go. And the guy says, there's nothing you could say or show me that will make me, recant the glory of the great technology, moon landings, and so forth. And I said, well, what about this? What if you saw Neil Armstrong on live television tearfully confessing the moon landings are fake, Bart Sibrel is correct, and I apologize, please forgive me. The guy said he would still think he walked on the moon anyway. And so my film, and you can actually see this film for free. Go to Sibrel.com, click on the top left button, S as in Sam, I, B as in boy, REL, Sibrel.com. The top left button is called Moon Man Video Links. Click on link 2, and you'll see a film that cost nearly $1 million to make, that was financed by a board member of an aerospace company who builds rockets for NASA, who knows it's fake, who has his patriotic duty, gave me $1 million to expose this. And you'll see this, classified footage, as well as opening up with this battle of kind of truth and lies going on. Because basically, I talk about this at the beginning of the book, a lie is, when someone lies, it's actually an admission to the world and to themselves that what they did is morally wrong. Otherwise, they tell the truth about it. Yeah, we faked the moon landing and darn proud of it. Yeah, we faked the beginning of the Gulf of Tonkin, but it's a good thing that 1 million people died, right? And so lying proves, even to the person doing it, that they themselves accept that what they're doing is morally wrong. Otherwise, they just tell the truth about it, right?
Yeah.
And so then a conspiracy is interesting, or a lie. I mean, half of all crimes in the world are conspiracies. Half are done in the heat and the emotion of the moment to rob something or to kill somebody. But the other half are plotted out. You plan to rob a bank. People plan to kill another person. And that's what conspiracy is. It's a legal term. People going to jail for conspiring.
I think in modern day times, people assume that conspiracy theory just means untruth. They associate that with an untruth, don't they? When it's exactly what you've just explained. It's just you need at least two people to conspire to cause hurt and other things, right?
Well, yeah, conspiracy is in the Bible. Multiple times, kings his cabinet were conspiring to kill him long in advance. And so, to me, the word conspiracy means hidden truth. The people who run the world are the criminals, and that's biblical and just factual. And therefore, they want to cover up their crimes, and the way that they do that is lying. They lie about what's really going on. They lied and send people around the moon when they really weren't. And just because every TV station says there's a disease blowing around the world, and so be sure to take that medicine for an illness you don't even have, maybe there's a reason for that as well. After all, Bill Gates says he made 20-to-1 investment. He invested, $20 billion and made $200 billion off of this medicine. And out of the guy's own mouth, he said one of the ways of reducing the number of people on the earth is through this particular medicine. Yeah. And of course, the guy's parents founded Planned Parenthood with the whole point of lowering the number of people on the earth because they felt superior to everybody else. Now, I'm a filmmaker, and God willing, I will make a feature film, my first one, next year. I'm not just sitting back, twiddling my thumb and daydreaming, wouldn't that be nice if it happened? No, I have a producer. I have a budget. I have two producers. I have, a location, casting. I have a plan. So a multi-billionaire like Bill Gates, if his goal is to get rid of 94% of the people on the earth, I don't think he's just wishful thinking, wouldn't that be nice if it happened? I think he has a plan. And because lowering the population by 94% is a horrific thing to do, the only way you could get away with it is to lie. We have to understand that Hitler and Stalin and Mussolini and the guy named Pak from Vietnam, all together, they killed something like 100 million people. And that was less than 100 years ago.
Yeah.
So maybe they're using technology in a more clever way rather than just lining people up and gassing them or machine gunning them down.
So, Bart,
that's what. Yeah, go ahead.
So, what would you say is the reason for the lie? You think that the initial lie was just because they were getting beat by the Russians in all kinds of aspects of the space race, so they came up with the whole moon thing, and then they've not been able to stop lie. Once you've told a lie like that, you can't stop, can you? So. Is it, or is there more to it? What is the reason for people watching who don't know what would you say is the reason for the lie?
Well, I mean, you could say initially pride. Kennedy said they were going to go to the moon by the end of the decade, or look foolish in front of the whole world. So they didn't want to look foolish. But then people in the military who told me it was fake before I believed them said it's really just about money. I mean, in today's dollars, it costs $200 billion to pretend to go to the moon. And seeing how they only went into Earth orbit, which is all they can do today, 50 years later, by the way, then they probably only used 25% of that $200 billion. Remember, right before 9/11 happened, what was the guy's name? I forget the defense secretary at the time.
Rumsfeld.
But anyway.
Rumsfeld,
yeah. He said, "Oh, by the way, the Pentagon has misplaced $2.3 billion." And it's like, well, it's all about money. I mean, I remember there being a news story during the Iraq War saying that whatever that BlackRock or whoever that contractor was charging the Pentagon $40 for a plastic ice cube tray you could get for 50 cents in Walmart.
Yeah.
And so it's a money scheme. And what can you do? The scriptures say the love of money is the root of all evil. And I don't know. I mean, one of the reasons why I changed my mind is not only did I see it as important for mankind to know and realized I'm going to die anyway, and I might as well risk my life for a just cause. I changed my mind. I mean, I remember 5 years go by, I call up Bill and say, I changed my mind. Let's do it. And days later, God helps me meet a millionaire to finance the thing who knows it's fake, who builds rockets for NASA. See how everything coming together?
Yeah.
And I open up the film with the Tower of Babel, which until about 200 years ago, the greatest technological achievement for the last 6,000 years has been how tall can you build a building without it collapsing on itself. I mean, they're still doing it to this day.
Yeah.
Dubai or New York or Chicago, who has the tallest building so far. And of course, they say the reason they were going to build it was just to boast. Look how great we are. We're better than the neighboring nation. Never finished. And then we show the largest man-made machine ever built in 1912, which was the ship called the Titanic. And they put in print, believe it or not, the ship that God himself could not sink. Interestingly, also never finished, you see. And then we have Tricky Dick Nixon. When he knows they are not on the moon, he had the audacity to say, putting a man on the moon is the greatest event since creation.
Wow.
And it just seemed to me, James, that there's this spiritual symbolism going on. I mean, the name Apollo, if you take it through the Greek and then the Aramaic and then the Hebrew, it means Lucifer, the father of lies.
Yeah.
What is mankind's greatest accomplishment? Putting a man on the moon. And why? And it's called a lie in its own name, Apollo.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really remarkable.
There's
Apollo means Lucifer, the liar.
There's a lot of the missions and all the imagery that they use as occultist, right? It's all satanic and links with the cult, right?
Yeah, and unfortunately, that's the world we live in. The Bible says that Lucifer and his dominion, those people run the earth until the return of the Messiah. That's just the way that it is. You can make the Messiah the Lord of your personal life and live according to the Messiah standard. But I mean, look at the world. There's child molestation and rape and murder and robbery and looting and all this criminality, and it's only increasing as each day goes on.
Yeah.
So, we live in a fallen world. I'm really surprised you can, at least during daylight in most cities in the world, actually walk down the street and buy a loaf of bread without getting assaulted. I mean, that's remarkable to the degree to which this world has fallen. I think most people strive to do what is right. Unfortunately, the sewer rises to the top in regard to world leaders. It seems like when honest people try to get up there, they're so disgusted that all that's left in our top leadership are corrupt people. The last chapter of my book, Moon Man, which is in audio, I read it, or Kindle or print at Sibrel.com, is called What to Do About This Mess. And one of the suggestions I have is, first of all, we need to not have elections anymore because you get to choose from corrupt candidate A or corrupt candidate B. Why not choose by lottery? I mean, they choose a life and death decision in court based on lottery. Why not choose by lottery? And then that's how we get our representatives. And then they can nominate among the ranks someone for president who then the public votes for, so that it kind of sidesteps all of this inherent corruption. And then the head of the FBI, the head of the Justice Department, the head of the FDA, they should not be presidential appointments, because you have a corrupt president kicking out the previous people and putting in corrupt people. I mean, if William Benny goes on national TV and says, oh, by the way, I worked in upper management for the NSA, and we spy on the private cell phone conversations of Supreme Court justices so that we can get financial and sexual impropriety on them to blackmail them to vote the way we tell them. It's an established fact that the federal government is blackmailing Supreme Court justices. Established fact, no one contradicts it. shouldn't there be a congressional investigation into that? Don't you think?
Yeah.
Something like that should be looked into.
Yeah.
No, but just the way that it is. And so the FBI rank and file knows who is honest, and they should nominate and elect their own leader. So should the Justice Department. So should the Food and Drug Administration and the CDC and all that. It's amazing. Some reporter found out that Fauci makes more money than the president of the United States, and Fauci literally went after that reporter for leaking that fact.
Yeah.
It's really scary.
Yeah.
And so what can you do? I mean, if you're a believer, the Bible says in Acts 2, save yourself from this corrupt generation. And we can't really save ourselves to the point into eternal life. That's a grace from God, but we can qualify for it by repenting. I mean, think about this, James. In all the years you've lived, have you ever seen a news story on the news, the evening news? And now we have a story about the following. Such and such, at-large bank robber, at-large murderer, at-large rapist, turn themselves into the police, confessing their crime so that they could, get right with God before they die.
No.
I've never had it happen. And yet that's all we have to do to live forever, you see? And, there really isn't a hell of torturing people. Otherwise, they too have eternal life. They're just dead forever after Judgment Day, like stepping on a bug, And so the real issue is living forever. And the way we qualify for forgiveness is repenting. And people don't realize this. Adolf Hitler could have got a conscience in the bunker in April of 1945 and met a believer, got baptized, and the believer who helped them could have said, now you need to walk to the front lines and turn yourself in and let yourself be hung. And he would be in heaven to everybody's surprise. So I don't really consider these evil people running the world my enemy. And even if they were, Jesus said, love your enemy. That's what convinces me he's not of this earth. So they're lost souls, and it would be wonderful if one or more of them got a conscience in the near future, decided to expose what they have done and what's going on in the world. I take when Jesus describes the last days, he says there'll be greater tribulation in the last days than in all of history combined. And he says, unless God personally intervenes, no one will be saved. I take that to mean that the evil people are going to win. I mean, they shot Kennedy in broad daylight in front of 200 eyewitnesses, and they got away with it, despite the fact that 3/4 of the public thinks the federal government killed their own president. They got away. Has a single court case gone to trial about 9/11 some 22 years ago?
Nope.
Not one in 20 years.
Nope.
You have 3,000 engineers saying those buildings were brought down by explosives, not airplanes, which was a cover for it. Nothing's done about it. And so I think the evil people are going to succeed. That's why the most important scripture is, what good is it to gain the whole world and forfeit your soul? These people, it looks like they're going to gain the world, and then what? When they die. That's why the meek will inherit the earth.
You're right. You're right. So, you're right as well. These things, the moon landings, 9/11, all these things that have happened through history, a lot of them, they don't stand up to these things don't stand up to the slightest bit scrutiny. You alluded to 9/11 and all thousands of engineers and architects who've risked their livelihood to speak out and say that, listen, it's absolutely impossible for aluminium planes to do that to structural steel. And still people don't believe it. You've got professionals and like say the moon landing, when you actually, a lot of people have not even spent any time at all looking at the Apollo missions, the footage. It's quite interesting that people defend these things and they've not actually even sat through and watched any of it. But when you look at it, it's so obvious that It's so obvious that it was staged. The props that they used, the scotch tape, curtain rods, cardboard, tin foil.
You know what I really like, James? First of all, this is so bizarre. I've talked to people in the military, and I said regarding 9/11, what about the third skyscraper, Building 7, the 47 tall building that collapsed because of a furniture fire?
Yeah.
They go like, "What's that? Never heard of it." I mean, half the
Yeah.
people in the country have never heard that 3 skyscrapers collapsed
Yeah.
because the third one proves the fraud more than any other. But what I like is that the government did an animation as to why, a couple of offices with furniture catching on fire
Yeah.
can cause a skyscraper to collapse in a couple of hours. They did an animation to prove it could happen.
Oh, well.
But then again, NASA did animation of the lunar lander landing on the moon to prove that was possible too. But I have animation of Daffy Duck, walking on clouds without falling through them.
Going back to the timeline, you've released a funny things happened on the way to the moon. So how long after the release of that documentary did you do Astronauts Gone Wild?
Officially 2 years later, basically. After I produced A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon, which 80% of the people who watch it reverse their opinion as to the authenticity of the moon missions. I thought, well, I guess from courtroom TV shows, why not track down some Apollo astronauts, put a Bible in front of them, and ask them to take an oath that they really walked on the moon. And that's where the infamous punch came from. Another person threatened to shoot me, another person threatened to hit me, another person literally kicked me with my back to them because I showed them the fake footage we uncovered, and they turned beet red and said, "Get out of my house." And in all the commotion there, we accidentally left a high quality wireless microphone on one of the Apollo astronauts after I showed him footage of the fake moon landing. And my camera person, in all the commotion of being threatened to be shot and physically assaulted, forgot to stop recording the camera as it's in the back seat of the rental car, and unintentionally recording the private conversations inside of the closed door house of the Apollo astronaut and his son, who are discussing whether or not to call the CIA to have me assassinated. Now, if they really went to the moon, and I'm some silly person, thinks it was done in a TV studio, why would the CIA have to be notified? I mean, come on.
Yeah.
And then, why does an Apollo astronaut have, CIA in his Rolodex? Another one. So it's an odd film that makes me uncomfortable to watch, to tell you the truth. Me confronting Neil Armstrong and him refusing to swear on the Bible that he walked on the moon. I mean, if I walked on the moon and someone thought that it was done in a TV studio, I would find that hysterically funny. And I'm like, sure, I'll swear on a Bible. With 3 or 4 stacked Bibles be better for you?
Yeah.
Are you okay? But the way they react is like me walking up to their wife and saying, "Hey, your husband's mistress says hello." They're mad because it's the truth.
Yeah.
And so
it was Buzz Aldrin who actually. Buzz Aldrin actually punched you in the face, right?
Yeah, that happened in the filming of Astronauts Gone Wild, and that's kind of where the title came from. After one punched me, one kicked me, and one threatened to have me executed by the CIA.
Ed Mitchell, Apollo 14. I believe that's who's the house you were in at the time, right?
Yeah, I guess was it 14? And so, in any case, it still doesn't tell the full story by any means. So I basically am trying to put this chapter of my life that lasted for 2 decades behind me. So I thought, well, let me just tell the full story. And the only way to do that is in a book. So I wrote a book called Moon Man, The True Story of a Filmmaker on the CIA Hit List. It took me 15 years to write, and it took me 2 years to edit the book. You can get it. You see my last name there. Just go to Sibrel.com. And I read it on audio. You can get it on Kindle or print. And I talk about the behind the scenes adventures of making this movie, including my literal X-Files CIA chases when I discovered classified footage of fake photography of them faking being halfway to the moon right in front of your eyes with a 1-foot model of the Earth. And I remember that was July of 1999. And I freaked out because I was producing the film under the theory it might be true that they faked it. I pop in a tape, it says, do not show to the public. And it's an hour of a special effects shot dated 2 days into the flight. The lights come up and you see it's a 1-foot model of the Earth that they're pretending is floating in space, with the CIA on a third track of audio telling them to fake a 4-second radio delay with NASA because they're really in Earth orbit about 250 miles up, but they need to pretend they're halfway to the moon. So the CIA is telling them to count off 4 seconds first, so it gives the impression you're further away from the Earth. And when I see that and listen to that, I'm like, oh my gosh, they really didn't go to the moon. And I remember calling up Bill Casey frantically, but Bill, they really didn't go. They really didn't go. And he's like, well, Bart, I told you. I said, no, you don't understand. They really faked it. It's like, well, Bart, I told you. I guess I didn't want to live in such a fallen world, because when I saw that footage, I just wept quietly. This is the world we live in. They faked the greatest event of mankind. And really what that means is our world leaders are juvenile because, okay, they set a goal to go to the moon and it ended up, we just can't do it. Why not just say that? You see, to be so juvenile that you would fake the most important, secular event in world history just because you're afraid to admit that you said you were going to do something. And then on top of it, be so afraid of getting caught that you murdered dozens of people to keep it a secret. You see, James, while I'm editing this book, I was put in touch with a man by the name of Cyrus Eugene Akers. So not only does Moon Man talk about me being literally drugged and kidnapped by the CIA after I found this classified footage, I escaped their custody. I peed in a cup and I said, I got him. I got truth serum in me. Because they drugged me and I was throwing up and seeing spots before my eyes. I was so drugged. And they had a clipboard ready. Where's the original of the tape? And blah, 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 blah. I told them everything they wanted to know. So the idea that you have to waterboard people is just not true.
Yeah.
And I escaped their custody. I peed in a cup and I gave it to a friend to take to a lab in his name so that I could hopefully, get these results. He calls me up a couple of days later and says, well, there was a problem at the lab. I'm like, yeah, what problem? He says, well, they had a break-in over the weekend. And I said, yeah. He said, well, funny thing, the only thing stolen was your urine sample. So the CIA knew about it and weren't about to have me scientifically prove I'd been drugged with truth serum by the government. They literally went in the middle of the night and removed my urine from a lab. In any case, I go into that, literal car chases, druggings, it's just amazing stuff, including meeting good guys in the government who have my back and told me, yeah, this is going on and stuff like this has been going on for a while. And then it gets even better. As I'm editing the book, I'm put in touch with Cyrus Eugene Akers, who was the chief of security at Cannon Air Force Base in 1968. And on his deathbed, he confessed that he stood beside President Johnson at Cannon Air Force Base in Clovis, New Mexico, while they filmed Apollo 11 1 year in advance. He eyewitnessed the faking of the moon landing. Now, the following I did not put in the book. I didn't put his name in the book because his son was still alive, and I wanted to not put too much pressure on the guy. But that wasn't all that he confessed, you see. He confessed he murdered a coworker to keep it a secret. Now, when you're dying and wanting to get right with a God and have a hope of, making it on Judgment Day, you don't make up that you killed somebody, right? Because the guy lived, another 6 months after that, and his son called the police on him to investigate who is this missing person for their own family members that my father killed, and that caused a pretty, serious parting of ways between the father and son. You don't make that stuff up.
No.
And sure enough, it's verified. He was the chief of security at Cannon Air Force Base. And he said the reason why I killed him was because he was going to go to the public and squeal that the moon landings are fake and they were filmed at our Air Force Base. And then President Johnson personally gave him a list of 15 people who were allowed in to eyewitness the event, including Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin Werner von Braun, Eugene Krantz, Van Allen, and some other people I never heard of. And I published this in the book as well. So these are serious revelations. And then some people on that list, one of which I never heard of, Robert Emmenegger, is still alive to this day. He's a science fiction writer, and I guess he was a science fiction consultant to see if it, the sets looked real enough. And another book of his, he says he was at Cannon Air Force Base in June of 1968 for a classified reason. And then you check Johnson's schedule, and he was 1 hour away on holiday, at his ranch near Cannon Air Force Base, because he was so curious.
Yeah.
He wanted to see what it looked like. And this is why Johnson never ran for re-election when he was eligible. The Democratic Party couldn't understand, why aren't you running for re-election? There's only been one other time in American history when an incumbent didn't run for re-election.
Yeah.
Because he knew the faking of the moon landing would be in the next term. And who knew that would work? I mean, what if you got caught as president supervising the faking of the moon landing? Didn't want to have anything to do with that, seeing how he was from Texas, where Houston Command Center was. Just didn't want to deal with that. Don't want to take a chance. And then passes that morsel on to Nixon, who obviously gave it the thumbs up. Yeah. So the idea that it's Republican versus Democrat or red versus blue, that's just not true. The government, the corrupt government, wants us fighting each other and wasting our time so we don't go after them, right? Yeah. I mean, how can it be that 3/4 of the American public thinks Oswald did not kill Kennedy, and to this day they won't open the Kennedy assassination files, and no one has ever gone to trial over it? I mean, this is how entrenched the evil people are in the world and leading our country.
Yeah.
So this is dangerous because their stated goal is to get rid of 94% of us, right? So they think that could be underway. I mean, how can it be that fertility rates have dropped by 65% over the last 50 years? Now, technology improves over time. Flashlights and TVs and cell phones, everything improves over time, and yet longevity is going down and fertility is going down. At the same time, the world leaders say they want to lower the population. So if technology increases and yet fertility rates are going down and longevity is going down, the only way that could be is if it's intentional, right?
100%.
It can't go down as technology goes up.
Yeah.
Unless it's intentional.
Yeah.
And it's coincidentally the stated goal of the people who run the world to do that.
Yeah. Well, these social elites have been talking about overpopulation for decades. This has always been their plan to cull the herd, right? It's always been the plan.
Yeah. So the interesting thing about the moon landing fraud, and maybe this is how we should wrap up, is even though, the Kennedy assassination witness list is allegedly 200 people they knocked off, of course, 3,000 on 9/11. As best as I can tell, somewhere around a dozen to 20 people were killed to keep the moon landing fraud a secret. So of those 3 frauds, it's actually killed the fewest number of people. However, it's the fraud that, if exposed, would cause the greatest amount of change and reform, because people got down on their knees and prayed for the safety of the men on the moon, and they cried and they waved their flag and they printed it on coins, on stamps, in the encyclopedia, and gave them congressional medals of honor for being such good liars. If the truth comes out about that, even though it killed the fewest number of people, I think it would cause such outrage that there would finally be reform in the government. Now, maybe the stock market would crash and the dollar would crash. Well, sometimes to get rid of cancer, you have to cut off a limb. And that's a messy thing. And it's a painful thing. And it's a sad thing.
Yeah.
But it's better than dropping dead.
Yeah.
And so we have to face facts. We have to face facts that they did fake the moon landing. They did kill Kennedy. They did do 9/11. And in my opinion, they're doing this little thing we've been going through for the last 2 years for nefarious reasons. So something should be done about evil in the world, don't you think? Even if you don't believe in God. Otherwise, they're going to kill you one
Yeah.
way or the other.
So
right?
I guess my final question to you before we wrap, because we're getting to the hour mark now. Do you think that the truth about the Apollo missions will ever come out properly? Do you think that the public will be made aware of the fact that we just, or will it ever be admitted that we just didn't go?
Well, I used to think there'll never be any proof whether we went or not. And now we have 4 proofs: the classified footage I uncovered, shadows intersecting, the fact that you can't have greater technology in the past, and then a personal eyewitness of it. Now, whether it'll be an established fact in the encyclopedia that, hey, this is one of the frauds that the Cold War did, or whoever they want to blame on it, I would say intellectually, I would say it's not going to happen. However, I would say spiritually and faithfully, it will happen. I think we're living in the last days. I think there's going to be, everything's going to, get worse, the Great Tribulation, and then there'll be a biblical reset. The Bible says there'll be a new heaven and a new earth, that the earth will be destroyed by fire, and that there'll be signs in the heavens. Maybe that's a comet or asteroid. I think that's what Janet Napolitano said the day she resigned, that a natural disaster is coming that's never happened in America. So we've had volcanoes and earthquakes, and you can't know about those things years in advance, but you could know about a comet and an asteroid years in advance because of the mathematics. So I think something like that is coming, and it's my hope and prayer that as a public rebuke of the evil in the world, the moon landing fraud will be exposed. And who knows, maybe Noah's Ark will be found as a last little encouragement that, yes, the Bible is true, these things did happen. And as strange as humans are, I mean, imagine you believe in evolution, that things made themselves. The fact that, they're walking beings that can make computers and at least spacecraft that can go into Earth orbit, that's pretty remarkable, even from an evolutionary point of view. So maybe other things evolved in other dimensions. You can call them aliens or angels or fallen angels or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe there's a war going on that we don't see beneath the radar there that's going on.
Yeah.
And maybe there's more than meets the eye. You don't see atoms, do you? But there they are.
Yeah. No. Yeah. I think you're right. There's a spiritual war going on right now, and yeah. Right. Okay. So.
Well, I mean, I
no, go,
yeah.
sorry,
Go ahead.
Go on. No. Go ahead, Bart.
Oh, just gonna say, you can read about all of this, the spiritual symbolism, my new information about my run-ins with the CIA, the name of the base and the code name, and the 15 people who were there when they filmed the faking of the moon landing. The deathbed confession from Cyrus Eugene Akers is in the book Moon Man, and it's at Sibrel, S as in Sam, I, B as in boy, REL, Sibrel.com, and audio, Kindle, or print. And I wish the moon landings were real, but they're not.
Yeah.
And if you want to know what's really going on in the world and what this symbolically means, the faking of the moon landing, just go to Sibrel.com and you can find out about my 20 years of research for about $20.
Perfect. And I would really recommend that people do that, because a funny thing happened on the way to the moon, and Astronauts Gone Wild, and obviously your book as well. It's so interesting. It's so interesting. I really recommend anyone watching this to go to Bart's website, Sibrel.com, and check those things out, because you cannot watch these things without finding out that we just simply did not go to the moon, and they faked every single mission. And that's
and if they lied about that, what else are they lying about?
Yeah. Man's
it's like someone throwing a glass of water in your face. You wake up and you realize you've been sleepwalking and you're 1 foot away from a cliff. It's a shock, but you're glad you were shocked.
Yeah. Right. And on that note, thanks again. Once again, Bart, thank you so much for sparing some time for us. We realize you're a very busy guy, and it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you. And I wish you all the best with everything, with the book and everything going forward. And we look forward to your first feature movie.
Won't that be grand?
Yeah.
Prayerfully it'll happen.
Yeah, we look forward to it. Right, guys, that's the end of it. If you like that, remember, just press the subscribe button and you'll never miss another episode. And on that note, thanks for watching, and we'll see you on another episode of The Loft Project. Goodbye.